Hi everyone, Assalamualaikum. I hope you guys are having a very pleasant Ramadan. Today is Ramadan day 3. I hope you guys are doing okay. So today is our first session where I want to discuss halal stuff. You know, basically all the questions that I have had about halal in my life in the past few years, and also questions which you guys have been asking, and then I although I know the answer, I don't want to answer it because I find that some of the questions require asatiza assistance to answer. And although, you know, it kind of like how you tahu all the syarat-syarat solat, but you will not want to teach it unless you're an asatiza, you know, something like that. Yeah, so some of your questions over the years, I know I started like teaching people about halal, doing classes about halal since 2014. Tapi over the past like 1 to 2 years, I actually took a slowed down approach, and I didn't really do much talking about halal, mainly because your questions were getting more and more in depth, and because it's more and more in depth, I didn't feel comfortable answering lah. So that's why I initiated Halal Confessions. So Halal Confessions will be talking about quite a number of things, a myriad of things. Waalaikumsalam Menembahulu SG. So so Halal Confessions will be talking about several things. And one of the things, and before, like, even when I open up questions for Halal Confessions, right, questions we receive range from like, can we eat kosher food? Is kosher food halal? Right down to, is kombucha halal? Can we eat at a cookie restaurant, with a cookie place which is not halal certified? You know, so so those kind of questions, and things like is kosher food halal? You know, is something that, even though I have run through it with my colleagues in the professional sphere when I was a halal consultant back then, I mean, we got those matters sorted out. Tapi for me to explain it publicly, whether through an article or through a video or through conversations, is quite hard. So I would prefer an asatiza to come in to help. So for the past like month or so, I had my assistant basically not scour Singapore macam drama gitu kan. It's just look for suitable asatiza who's willing to take on the topic with me. And Alhamdulillah, today we have Ustaz Farouq, who has agreed to come on board to talk about halal with me. So now we are just waiting for him to come in. He's gonna make a request. So once I see him come into the live, and once he makes a request, then we'll start. Okay? But other than that, if you guys have questions, and I cannot promise that we'll answer everything. As is, there are already some questions here. I'll just show you guys. See, there are some questions here already. There are some questions here as well. Some response cannot be shared. But okay, so yes, Ustaz Farouq has made the request. So we can't promise that we'll answer all the questions, but I will select some questions, okay? I hope this will be insightful discussion, inshallah. Hi, Assalamualaikum.
Waalaikumsalam. Is my audio clear?
Yes, sorry. Hi.
Okay.
Okay, hang on. Ustaz Farouq should be frozen.
Okay.
Okay, let's introduce Ustaz Farouq first. Okay, so let's introduce Ustaz Farouq first. So Ustaz Farouq was recommended to me by my assistant. She prefers not to be named, so we shall leave her out. But she was integral in selecting the asatiza that for me to have the discussion with. So Ustaz Farouq, when she introduced Ustaz Farouq, talk to me about Ustaz Farouq, she introduced Ustaz Farouq as someone who's very learned. So he graduated with Islamic Thought and Applied Ethics at Hamad bin Khalifa University in Qatar. and also BA in Comparative Religion and Usuluddin from International Islamic Design. International Islamic University of Malaysia, UIA. Okay, so every asatiza picks. Okay, this is also one of the. I want to share that this is also one of the reasons why it's quite hard for you to find asatiza, because most asatiza actually pick a specialty or topic of interest, and they usually speak about that commonly in their public talks. So yeah, so not many asatiza which openly like break down halal matters, and hence Ustaz Farouq was recommended. I was really happy because his area of concern that he's interested is under human development and ethics, and both some parts of it has got to do with halal. Yes, Ustaz Farouq. Assalamualaikum Ustaz.
Waalaikumsalam. Thank you for your very generous introduction. Okay, is my audio okay? Because it's raining and the connection is the connection can be problematic.
Yeah, you are breaking up a bit. Tapi is this a Wi-Fi connection atau?
Yeah, it's the Wi-Fi. Maybe I should be using my data. Is it advisable?
No, Wi-Fi is usually better, but you can give it a try. You can sub in again if you want, or you just change your data. We see how it goes. Yeah, but your email is good.
Okay, hold on. I think. Okay, is this better?
Yeah. Yes, slightly better. Yes. Okay. Now
okay. Okay, I see familiar. This is my first time going on live, so I see familiar names. So I'm a bit excited. Yes, I can call them out also, right? Okay.
Okay. So, Ustaz. Okay. So this is our first episode. So I thought I wanted to get into the crux of it. So I wanted to get a feel of whether I have been approaching halal as a lifestyle or halal as a choice that I'm making every day, whether I've been approaching it correctly. So let's get down to the crux. Maybe Ustaz, if you could if I were to ask you to explain the word halal in terms of food, for sure. Let's not talk about the other parts of halal because it's too big. But let's talk about food. So how should we be approaching and understanding the word halal?
Okay. So thanks, Jumaya, for the opportunity first and for the introduction again. So I think it's not on me to help you evaluate whether it's a lifestyle or whether it's a choice, right? But I think hopefully through these conversations, I hope that we can expand our understanding of halal and somewhat deepen our understanding of what comprises halal. So let me begin with, of course, the standard definition, which is something that is lawful or permissible. It can also be simply defined as ma ahallahu Allah wa rasuluh, meaning something that is accepted or deemed permissible by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. However, deeper understanding of halal is a permissible act that benefits the person by seeking for Allah's pleasure or mardatillah, where Allah mentions in Surah An-Nisa verse 114, وَمَنْ يَفْعَلْ ذَلِكَ ابْتِغَاءَ مَرْضَاتِ اللَّهِ فَسَوْفَ نُؤْتِيهِ أَجْرًا عَظِيمًا. And whoever does this, seeking Allah's pleasure, we will give him a mighty reward. So now, using this definition, in the case of food, of course, we refer to these standards prescribed in the revelations, both in the Quran and also the prophetic tradition. However, it is important to note that these standards don't represent a goal only, but it is an entire process from the welfare of the animal to the process of slaughtering, and finally, because it's mardatillah, it deals with character building, which is unfortunately not really emphasized when we talk about halal matters. So why is this so? I'm interested in trying to understand the genealogy of ideas or the origin of ideas, like where did we get this understanding? How did it shape our our understanding of halal. So the sound is breaking up. I really apologize for that. Okay.
Yeah, it's the static actually. Or, I mean, yeah,
It,
your sound is breaking up, but I can actually form your sentences lah. It's just not smooth.
okay.
So, yeah.
Oh my, that's bad. Okay. Um, I'm not really well informed of this. Should I like remove my ear headphone or something? No, or that doesn't affect,
No,
right?
your headphones doesn't affect it. It's more of the internet connection. Yeah.
Okay. I think must be the rain because I'm living just opposite JB. So
Oh,
sometimes that,
yeah.
yeah,
It's
it's right
okay.
at the edge of Singapore. Okay.
We
So
your phone is breaking up, but I can still make up the no the I can make up the sentences, and we'll
okay.
be saving the live. We'll be saving this live session, and on top of that, I
Okay.
have my team who's taking notes with whatever you're saying.
Okay. Perfect.
So
I can also share my notes later if let's say you want to distribute. I have no issues with that.
okay.
But going back to what I've mentioned, where the final goal of halal, which is character building, this is for me unfortunately not really much emphasized when we talk about halal matters, because in my opinion, our understanding of Islam has been reduced to a legal barometer, where it is constantly gravitating between a code of halal and haram. So it's either halal or haram. But we don't try to understand why it is halal or why it is haram, how it becomes halal and how it becomes haram. Right? I think there is a deeper questions that we should be asking. And I'm not denying its importance, as these are key concepts in the legal tradition that allows us to make sense of the realities around us. However, if we aspire to challenge, shape, and change our realities, then this idea of halal should be interlinked with what I call an ethical construct of halal itself that is in line with the Quran vision for society, and maybe we can talk about it later. Yep.
Okay, okay, just in that short minute you said something which are so heavy already. So I'm like, Yeah, so I was just reflecting. Um why 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 is it that okay, can you explain a bit deeper about the part where character building?
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
So
Like
so
choose
so
halal
when we look at okay, all right. So when we look at character building, right, we are talking about how food. I mean, we always hear the term "you are what you eat." So in Islam or in the Islamic tradition itself, of course, we don't have this idea of you are what you eat, but you are accepted. Your deeds are accepted because of what you do, what you eat, and what you consume. And the end goal of everything that we do should be to seek the pleasure of Allah Subhanahu wa Taala. So as simple as not just only about praying, even as a simple act as right, something that is mubah, right, we can make it an act that is rewarded by seeking Allah's pleasure, because innama a'malu binniyat, right, that is the key principle in Islamic tradition, whereby every action begins with good intention. So that is why even when we before we eat, there is an adab before we eat. We have to recite the name of the tasmiyah, right? We have to recite the name of Allah Subhanahu wa Taala, and even during the slaughtering process also. Although there is an what do you call it? Different opinions on whether there is a necessity to recite the name of Allah Subhanahu wa Taala, but I am of the opinion that we have to do because of certain things that I hope to discuss later. Yeah. So to answer your question very briefly, why it is important to have this character building, because every action, the end goal has to always be to seek Allah's pleasure. So if, let's say, what you do is not building your character, then it is not really in line with that end goal, that is to seek or ibtigha maradatillah. Yeah.
Okay. I want to share a joke, but I don't know whether the internet connection is ready for it. Because just before this live, I received a question which asked, can Muslims eat this cookie? And then he gives the name of the cookie shop, even though it is not halal.
Okay.
So now, so now when you mention it, like, you know, whether it's not whether you can eat the halal cookie or not, it's whether the cookie, when you eat it, whether it forms your character,
Yeah.
whether eating that non-halal cookie forms what gives you Allah's pleasure by you eating that non-halal cookie. So I have now figured out a new way to answer such questions. Thank you, Ustaz. It's very
Alhamdulillah. I mean, it's good that you make it digestible for everyone, including myself. But of course, I have to also emphasize, right? As human beings, we always struggle to mediate between the ideal and reality, right? That is why we have the principle of ihsan to complement what Islam and Iman is, right? Ihsan is often translated as perfection, which I'm not really comfortable with that direct translation, because perfection only lies in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But ihsan is the struggle for perfection, right? So we have this belief system and we have the action. So we always have this, and it is guided by this ethical system, which is ihsan, or this ethical principle, which is ihsan, so that we hope that we can achieve that ideal, some way or another, right? Because I think that is the human condition. We are never created to be flawless. We are flawed. So we always struggle or to strive at least to achieve Allah's pleasure, and that is perfection, which is Allah's pleasure.
Okay, understand. Okay, I'm actually digesting quite a bit right now. Okay, so that part I understand, and I understand this whole approach, okay, to halal, but as like what you mentioned, between belief and reality, right? So when we're talking about when in the reality, like in practice, legislation are involved. Like, for example, if I were to say halal certification standards, or when we have to decide for other people whether it's halal or not. Of course, largely this applies to certification bodies all over the world, but I'm also looking at Muslim-owned business owners, you know, because if you are a Muslim-owned business owner, a consumer believes you to be handling only halal matters, only halal food, right? So that means you as a business owner, you are deciding for your patrons what is halal. So in that light, let's talk about the definitions. So what are the definitions? What have been obviously defined as halal, or what has been obviously defined as haram? Because from what I've learned, and I'm checking this again for my learning, is that everything is halal unless it is otherwise stated as haram in the Quran. Yes.
Yep. Okay. So that is the general guideline when it comes to halal food, right? Or our dietary standards, where everything is halal unless it is specifically mentioned as a prohibition in the revelation. And then, you know, we have multiple, let me go with the Quran first, right? In the Quran, you have multiple verses that I think most of us are familiar with, that mentions what is allowed for us. So, for example, the most famous one is Ya ayyuhalladhina amanu kulu min tayyibati ma razaqnakum, right? O you who believe, eat the good things that we have provided for you and be grateful to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And even in this verse itself, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said, and if it is Him that you worship. So you see, the end goal, we always focus on, you know, halal, what Allah has provided, but the end goal is still to worship. You know, so character building is part of that worship itself. And you know, we have other verses in Surah Al-Baqarah where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentioned that He has only forbidden to you dead animals, the blood, the flesh of the swine, and that which has been dedicated to other than Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But I mean, we can go through the multiple verses, but I think the overarching Quranic guideline is the emphasis on food that is good, whole and pure and to actualize our purpose of existence in this world, which is to worship Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So these values are encapsulated in the concept of tayyib, right? Halal and tayyiban. And the concept of tayyib is always juxtaposed with the notion of halal in the Quran. So some have also argued that the word tayyib is a manifestation of both ihsan and itqan, which is beautiful, right, or the struggle for perfection, and to actualize this idea of tayyib in a perfect manner. So for this reason, the quality or the value of whether something is halal or whether something is haram, it cannot be a matter that has to be, it cannot be something that is judged in isolation, right? But it must take into account the process of production. Like I mentioned, it is something that is very holistic. It must take into account the process of production, the adab in dealing with the process itself, the ways of consumption, and very important is its ecological implication, which we discussed before we had this live session, right? The ecological implications of our consumption habits, of the food that we eat. Therefore, anything that contravenes this practice is seen as khabith, or something that is impure. And of course, the pursuit of the highest standards should be sought not just in halal food only, but our entire life has to be halal and tayyiban. So it applies for life in general. So this is what is outlined in at least the Quranic vision of what halal and tayyib is in reference to food itself. Yeah.
Okay. As you're talking about that, I just want to highlight the most recent Netflix movie.
Yes.
If you guys have not watched Seaspiracy, you guys should totally watch it. And just a reflection. Actually, when we watched the show, when I watched Seaspiracy, and then I told everyone in my team to go and watch Seaspiracy on Netflix. And then we had a little discourse in the office, and I was very it really hit me when one of the team members actually said, and this was one of our younger team members, she actually said, I feel very shocked looking at that show, because it makes me wonder whether anything we're eating is truly halal. So
I mean, that is a good question to. I mean, that should be the question that we should be all asking, because I mean, I know I'm not supposed to answer this right now, but maybe if you can allow me to just respond to that very briefly.
Yes.
Yeah. Right. So I think that should be the question. So I really applaud you, Ethan, for asking this big question, right? Of course, we should not go into the minute details of trying to scrutinize whether everything is halal and haram, because that will make things difficult for us. But at least when we consume, we must have this big question, or this philosophical understanding of what we eat, right, has its implications too, right? It's not whether it's just halal or not, but to know what are the implications of us consuming this, not just to the environment, but as simple as to our body itself, right? So this is the question that we should be asking ourselves when we eat something. And yeah, I mean, it is something that is very relevant and pertinent to our industrialized understanding of halal. Yeah.
okay.
It is scary. It is scary though. I have to agree that when I watched that documentary, I mean, I'm always like this, when I watch documentary, right? This is the thing why I don't like to watch documentaries, because I'm easily swayed by documentaries. Right? And like I couldn't sleep, right? Like even now fish, you cannot like really eat or take it for granted. I mean, this is something that we should not be comfortable with, right? Because it's not part of our fitrah to be comfortable with corruption and something that is ugly. Anyway, okay, back to the question. Yeah.
I want to expand on this topic a little bit, just a little bit more.
Of course.
Because just yesterday, okay, so macam like what we mentioned just now, there's always a dichotomy between beliefs and reality, right? So I love that you put it that way, because the reality is that yesterday I received a question asking me for halal and vegan food options.
Mm-hmm.
Halal and vegan are almost like non-existent in Singapore lah. There's only in my head right now, there's only one option. Like they are halal certified and they sell 100% vegetables and nothing else. Yeah. So and they're not even trying to market themselves as a meat substitute though. They just say that hey, we are a vegetable. We only use vegetables for our food. Yeah. So, what is your opinion on I would say the increasing number of Muslims who right now are choosing to have a vegan diet? Is that necessary? Is that a little extreme, or is that what we call also their personal choice, which they derived as part of halal and toy?
Yeah. So
Because I really don't know what to make of it, to be honest. Yeah. Okay, Ustaz is frozen. Okay, for you guys
okay,
who
I'm
are
back.
asking
Yeah.
questions, yeah. The Netflix show is Seaspiracy for those of you guys who are asking, okay? Okay, Ustaz, are you okay? Are you there?
Okay. Really sorry
Okay.
about this.
Yes, you're back. Hi.
Okay.
It's okay. You
Okay.
can be patient. Okay.
So
Yes.
yeah,
On
to
Muslims.
respond, yeah. So just to respond briefly to your question, that when it comes again to halal, it is individual choice. But again, that individual choice, it should be linked or interlinked with this collective consciousness or this planetary consciousness, right? So if it is an individual choice for someone to be vegan, I think that is totally fine, right? There's no issues at all. But again, this is something that is a casual discussion between me and my siblings or even my wife, right? Like I was, don't take this as a fatwa, right? But you know, like I'm it was also after this conspiracy, and you know, you have many other documentaries that you know what, we should be vegan. But I told her, then I later realized that hey, if everyone becomes vegan, isn't it the same? We are going to exploit the same things that we have done when we actually consume meat, right? So imagine if everyone becomes vegan, the same thing would happen. So there is a deeper issue that we're not addressing, which is our consumption habits. So, you know, going vegan is absolutely fine, right? But to eat meat is also okay. But how much do we eat, right? That is the question that we should be asking ourselves. Because I remember, if I'm not mistaken, Sheikh Hamza Yusuf, he mentioned that Muslims in the past, they are semi-vegetarian, right? But today Muslims are carnivores, right? We are full meat eaters, right? So that is something that we have to reflect on our condition today. So it's not just about going vegan, but if let's say you be vegan, right? I mean that you know you're okay, right? You have to also look at your habits, your consumption habits. You have to lessen your meat intake, and I also think that when you go vegan, right, you should not impose that on others also, right? Because some can be quite aggressive. Because again, like I said, it's an individual choice, and we have to respect people for their choices. But we have to ensure that choice is not something that is selfish. It has to be something that is selfless. So if we choose to eat meat, right, then we have to be selfless in our consumption of meat, not selfish in our consumption of meat. Yeah.
Okay.
Mhm.
Okay, thank you, Ustaz. Now we're gonna go to the last question that I have for the preset questions, and that is, what are obviously not halal as specified in the Quran or Hadith? Okay, okay, Ustaz is frozen, but I'm gonna just say first. So I'm gonna let you answer first, right? After that, we're gonna do a trivia. So I'm gonna say a food item or a meat item, and then you're gonna
Okay.
say haram or not.
Okay.
Okay?
I didn't catch the question. Sorry, because of
Okay, the
the
question is,
internet. But is it referring to what is specifically prohibited or?
yes, specifically
Okay.
prohibited.
Hmm.
Okay.
Okay.
So let's
So before we
listen lah.
get
Let's get technical.
okay, so of course, okay, uh, we we know that when it comes to the technical stuff, then we can find this on Mui's website, right?
Someone's avoiding. No.
No, no, but I think this is something that is part of the revelation, right? That means things that have been outlined by the prophetic tradition and also in the Quran. So things that are very explicit, such as pig, dogs, animal with pointed teeth, predatory animals, right? Birds with claws, and then birds or animals that are clearly mentioned that you cannot um, kill, right? Like a spider, for example. And then animals that some scholars even say that animals that um, somewhat is I forgot the term, but the condition that they are living, right? Like donkey, for example, right? There are some scholars who forbid the consumption of donkey because the animal is seen as something that is considered low, right, in society in terms of its status, the animal ecosystem, in some societies, of course, right? And of course, we have something that like animals that live in both worlds, like amphibians, frogs, and then of course alcohol, can, and something that is intoxicating. These are things that you can find on Mui's website. But like I mentioned, right, I would like to expand our language on prohibition, right?
Yes.
Uh, that includes, so that was just an opener, right? So you can refer to Miss website for the technical stuff. But for me, I would like to expand our language on prohibition. That includes, again, both a planetary. When I talk about planet, I'm talking about Earth as a whole, right? Engagement and vision, a planetary engagement and vision. So uh, I use this example of in the legal tradition we have the example of maslahah, which is common good, right? That primarily deals with the human, and at the same time, you know, when it comes to maslahah, it's also crucial. When we talk about maslahah, it's also crucial to recognize that Allah has created all living organisms to be interdependent to maintain the balance in nature. And since humans are created to be Khalifatullah fil ard, or God's stewards on earth, then it should also be in their best interest to establish a sustainable ecosystem that preserves the equilibrium of the natural world and not cause harm, which is the opposite of manfa'ah, which is mafsada, right? So therefore, what I'm trying to say here is, therefore, being critical consumers and conserving endangered species should fall under the purview of maslahah, as it ultimately concerns the pursuit of the human well-being, because the human being is part of the ecosystem itself, right? So any disruption of the ecosystem, it affects the human well-being. So even though something might be halal, but because it is endangered, right, it can cause harm on the human being, right? So anything that disrupts this balance basically should not just fall within the category of makruh, because I also study some of the fatwas, right? You know, scholars are a bit reserved and they have every right to be reserved when they want to issue an opinion because of the social consequences, you know. But I think, again, we have to take this planetary engagement of vision when it comes to issuing certain position, right? So for me, it should not just fall in the category of macro, but if, let's say, there are huge ecological implications, right? Nowadays, we also have climate refugees, right? And because of this, I do think that there should be space for us to rethink our position of makruh on this. I'm not going to give the hukum, right? I'm leaving that to you, right? But for you to think about, what you are eating. So my question that should we, for example, still continue to eat? For some, it's a delicacy, telur penyu, right? Or shark fin, or I mean, I know this can be quite sensitive, but for those who travel to Japan, bluefin tuna, right? So bluefin tuna, I mean, it has declined severely from overfishing or industrialized fishing. If you watch the Netflix documentary, right? Um, and when we look also at the legal deliberations of harmfulness on certain matters, some scholars like Sheikh Abdul Karim Zaidan and Sheikh Wahab Zuhaili have categorized harmfulness into two parts. So the first is harmfulness that is caused by the matters itself, which is al-hurma li zatihi. That means in essence, right, it is ontologically prohibited because of its harmfulness. And secondly, it is harmfulness that stems from an external factor, which is al-hurma li ghayrihi. So take for example, giving a knife to a chef in the kitchen, right? It is as a gift, it is commendable act. However, giving the same knives as a gift to two individuals who are in the middle of a fight is not allowed, right? Even though the knife is not something that is haram, right, in Islam, but taking into context the situation and condition would make giving the knives something that is forbidden. So of course, I'm not going back to the context of food. I'm not calling for a categorical prohibition of meat consumption and for Muslims, including myself, to go vegan overnight, right? Because it will not be practical, right? You are changing an entire lifestyle. What I'm trying to highlight here is our understanding of halal and haram should be connected to the cosmos, right? To the universe itself. And there is a metaphysical, I'm trying to say there is a metaphysical element of halal and haram, of food itself, that we have to protect. Unfortunately, our consumption habits and lifestyle, it is devoid of the metaphysical and the sacred. And the most part of it is, unfortunately, including myself, it is industrialized and mechanized. So strict regulations for me is not enough, right? We need education. We need ground-up initiatives. We need, governmental interventions to make ethical consumption something that is viable for every individual, regardless of his or her socioeconomic status. So, Allahu A'lam.
Okay, thank you, Ustaz, for that. I'm when you were talking, I'm actually trying to look at my own choices and know what kind of choices I've been making and promoting, in fact. But okay, so what I gathered from you is this. You know how we always say just because it's not halal certified doesn't mean it is halal, right?
Yeah.
So by way of your reasoning, you're also saying just because it is halal certified, it doesn't mean we have to eat it, or it doesn't mean we should eat it, right?
Yes.
So it applies the other way as well. So example, one of the most controversial items that I've been asked to promote, right, is foie gras. Okay, so foie gras, for those that you don't know, foie gras is like macam loosely used term. Foie gras is, you're referring to either a duck or a goose that has been force fed. So they have been force fed to the point that their body produce so much fat that the meat becomes so tender and soft, right? So it is a delicacy lah, kan? So when I was working as a halal auditor, foie gras is outrightly macam mentioned as haram. It's a no because you are torturing the animal, right? So even though it's slaughtered in a halal manner, it's still not halal lah. But then when I was introduced just 1 to 2 years ago, halal certified foie gras. So legally, you get what I mean? Legally, right? You can how do I put it? You can form legal standards to say that foie gras is halal because the animal wasn't force fed. There was no animal torture, whatever, kan? So you can say that it is halal, halal certified, because legally it meets the conditions, right? But technically, as a Muslim, I would have to make a choice whether I want to eat it, even though it is halal certified.
Absolutely.
Right? Because
Right. I
eating
mean,
and promoting is promoting a certain type of lifestyle. Okay.
yeah. Yeah, I mean, I have no response because you answered that question already, right? Like, okay, you have what is it again for
Foie Gras.
Foie Gras, right?
Foie Gras. Foie Gras. Yeah.
Okay, that's interesting. Thank you. So at least now I know I should be avoiding that, right? But exactly, right? It works both ways. You know, we always focus on, you know, halal certified, not halal certified. But even for things that are halal certified, it doesn't necessarily mean that we should eat it. We can eat it legally, all right? But again, like I mentioned in my presentation or yes, a presentation. I'm talking about the conversation, right? In the beginning of the conversation, I mentioned that you know, it is good enough to follow the legal guidelines, but if you want to shape, change, and transform our realities, we need an ethical construct that is interlinked with these legal guidelines. So yes, it can be halal, but again, it is devoid of the ethics, right? Like I said, when it comes to halal, again, it's not just the food, but it is the entire process. And the end goal of that process is character building. So how can it build your character when you know that in that process itself, you are actually torturing the animal? So this is something for us to try, right? So, okay, we can talk about foie gras, right? Foie gras. I don't want to mispronounce it. But we can also we can also talk about you know, something that is quite sensitive, like processed meat, right? I mean, processed meat is halal. It is, you know, technically halal because it has met the of course, it has to meet the conditions, lah, right? But again, you know, should we be eating it? Right? That is the question that we should be asking ourselves. Again, this is also something that I try to be cautious, right, when we talk about ethical consumption, because not everyone is able to actualize, you know, this ethical construct or these ethical ideals because of their socio-economic realities. So not everyone is able to eat healthily, right? And they are forced to make certain decisions that are unhealthy for them because of their socio-economic conditions. So that is why, you know, if let's say you want to come up with something that is viable, it has to be both not just viable in terms of our physical, spiritual, we can talk about it, but it has to be also economically viable, not just for the rich, right, but for those who are in a difficult condition, right? We have to be assured that, you know, they have access to this too. So this is something that I try to be very watchful, because we are coming from a position of privilege, right? We are able to make, or we have stronger spending power, right, to spend on what we want. But for those, there are many out there who don't have this strong spending power to make certain choices. So whatever that is cheap, and you know, they are put in that situation. So you know, this is something that we also have to address. It has to be something that is holistic when we want to talk about something that is viable. Okay. Nanti continue buat pula.
Okay. Something else came to mind, okay, but I'm just going to mention it, but we're not going to discuss it because it will take another whole session.
Okay.
And that is whether or not we should be consuming halal certified non-alcoholic wine. Okay, but I'm just going to mention it. So that is a whole. Let's not get started on that. So we got only about 10 minutes left. So I'm gonna take a question. Okay. So there's a lot of questions that have come here. Yes. So there are some questions that's come here. So I'm gonna just pick one or two. Let me see. Okay. If there is no halal logo but ingredients doesn't have any haram ingredients, is it permissible to eat?
Yeah. So a simple answer. Also, a simple answer would be yes and no, right? So yes, it is permissible to eat, no, right? I'm not saying that it is prohibited, but no, you should refrain if it has that ecological implication that is bad for you and the environment. So like I gave an example of processed meat, like you mentioned also the foie gras, right? So, even though it is halal, there's no halal, but we have done our due diligence, right? And, we find that we are certain that we can eat it. But again, it should not be separated from our consciousness of the environment. Yeah.
Mm.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. The next question is something that pops up from time to time in my DMs.
Yeah.
So I hope you can help us with this. A non-Muslim recently asked me why we cannot consume food that has been cooked in alcohol, but the alcohol has already evaporated.
Yeah. Okay. So I think at Shafi we see alcohols as something that is khabith, right? Something that is impure, right? And I remember I received this question also when I was in Tangier, which is part of Spain, before we wanted to before we traveled to Tarifa in Tarifa, before we traveled to Tangier. So we had to find a place to eat, right? But we couldn't find a place to eat that is halal. Usually you have the kebab shops lah. So I remember we asked the receptionist, me and my friend, is there any food? Because he's a Muslim, right? So with our, we us being so naive, right? And we're not aware of the differences in school of thoughts or. So he said, okay, we can eat it, but there's alcohol, but it's okay. It's only for the flavor. And we were taken aback, like, we're not used to this, right? Because whatever that is haram, even if it's little, we believe that, it is impure, right? So that's why as Shafi, we hold on to this principle. And I personally hold on to this principle too. When it comes to alcohol for flavoring, right, I think the prohibition applies. But when it comes, when alcohol in a therapeutic sense, meaning it is done for therapeutic reasons, then it is something that is different. And even for therapeutic reasons, we'll not be using Carlsberg or Tiger beer, right? You'll be using other forms of alcohol. But I'm talking about alcohol that is commercialized. So that for me is something that is prohibited because of our school of thought that sees alcohol as something that is khabith, something that is impure. So even if it has evaporated, right, there is still contact. Right, remember, some things are halal unless there is contact with something haram, even if it's internally or externally. Right, so it is hurma li zatihi or hurma li ghayrihi. So in this case, it is hurma li ghayrihi because of the alcohol itself. Yeah.
Okay.
Allahu a'lam. Yeah.
Allahu a'lam. Okay, Ustaz, last question. This one came out quite a bit as well. Is kosher considered halal? I can answer this.
Yes,
but I choose not to.
Why? Maybe you nice.
Okay, because I come from okay, when my experience as a halal auditor kan, everything is very macam black and white tau. So like for it to meet a halal requirement kan, it is a 10-step route example lah. You need to meet all these 10 steps. Okay, you meet it, it's halal. When it comes to kosher certification, right? Kosher certification is way stricter than halal certification. If you think halal certification is hard, try to get a kosher certification. So it's way harder. Yeah, and like if it's kosher, like okay, so we in our macam among us halal that time lah, halal auditors and people who look at certification as a process, because this is Singapore, we're in a secular society. The way people here understand halal is it is a checklist, but as what we have discussed today, it is not a checklist. But yeah, so kosher meets the checklist of halal. Okay. Maybe the only grey area is the part where it comes to the meat slaughter. Yeah, but that is another topic. That is actually episode 4 of Halal Confessions, by the way. So yeah, so if it's kosher and vegan, usually I'm okay to consume it. I would take it as halal. Yeah. But when meat comes into the picture, there's some gray area. I would actually avoid it. But as you can see, my answer is a very technical answer. It's not from a spiritual perspective, and it's not from a Usuluddin punya standpoint. It is more of technicalities. Like I have my checklist, it meets it. Okay?
Yeah.
But yes.
Yeah.
So Ustaz will give a different answer.
Okay. Again, I'm not a fatwa book, right? I don't give out fatwas, but this is just my personal opinion. That again, I think I have to agree with you here, Jumaya, right? That based on my engagement with my Jewish friends also, right, you can understand and see that it is way stricter than what we understand halal, and sometimes, unfortunately, right, not unfortunately, but something that we can learn, it is more holistic. Because they are concerned of the animal itself, or you know, the environment itself. So they are very particular with what they eat. They don't just eat anyhow. Makan asal boleh lah. So they are very particular. So in that particularity, right, we can learn a lot from them. Of course, we cannot be too particular, right? We cannot scrutinize it to the minute details, but we can learn a lot from them. So even for the meat itself, based on my humble knowledge lah, that the halal slaughter, where the tasmiyah, right, it is something that is there is khilaf in it, right? Meaning you can either say it or whether you cannot say it. There is khilaf in it. But for the Jewish, for the kosher guideline, it is a must. It is a requirement for you to slaughter in the name of God, right? So of course they have their own language of God, but there is an invocation of God, right? So when I was in America, we were sent to an interfaith workshop, and they serve us all kosher meat, right? Of course, you can demand your own halal meat, but that would not be wise, right? Because again, there is that social trust that comes with halal itself that we have to also take into consideration. So, you know, in that case, I'm okay with eating kosher meat also, because, you know I am certain, I've done my due diligence that this meets my halal requirement, right? And it's also something that is tayyib, right? Because, you know, you have to even cook it in a certain way, right? You cannot campur the milk and the dairy products, you know. So it is very strict, and we can learn a lot from that. So just to answer your question, personally, I am okay with it. Yeah, but again, if let's say you have other options, then go for the other options, right? Go and support local businesses, right? Especially the local businesses, they promote tayyib items, right? So you know, macam in dire situations, where you don't have any halal options and there are more kosher options, then why not, right? Why not?
Okay, thank you, Ustaz. We are already at 54 minutes, so we got 2 to 3 minutes more. Do you have any final parting words for followers of Halal Food Hunt who eats non-stop, apparently?
No. But actually, I prepared an overall recommended approach for halal.
Yes, please.
But
I'd like to hear it.
But very briefly, so basically, I would like to outline 3 different, or not 3 different, but 3 interlinked points that concerns halal matters. So first, I think it is very important when we talk about halal, right? There is a metaphysical aspect. We have to reconnect with mortality. Now, why I say reconnect with mortality, meaning we have to reconnect with death. We have to construct life based on death. Death is a reality. Death is not something that is fleeting. It is something that is a reality. It is a present. So the way we consume meat today, right, it is something that is very industrialized, where it comes to us with in a pound of flesh, tightly packed with its calculated worth, and it is far removed from the metaphysical element of the sacrifice, to an extent that we fail to recognize that a life was taken at all, right? So for me, this has some theological implications that we need to discuss. So we need to reconnect with that. We need to be as close as possible to the life that was given to us for our benefit, right? So this is what we call farming. but we need to talk about it. And secondly is when we talk about ethical consumption, right? It has to be based on what is also known as the principles of creation, which are the maqasid al-khalq, right? Where the Quran basically introduces a detailed vision about the universe, the position of humans, and how man should act and behave in a certain way or in an ethical way. And the first task. There are three main tasks. The first task is basically imaratul ard, which is the cultivation of the earth. So we have to relook into our language today, of language as to how we see the nature, right? How we see the universe. Because language, I'm not talking about linguistics, I'm talking about ontology. Language is a worldview, right? When we talk about nature, we always see something, we have this tendency to conquer nature, right? To conquer Mount Everest. So we should rethink our language when it comes to nature, right? Change conquer to something that is cultivating. Ad-dunya mazra'atu lil akhirah, right? Where the world, it is like a farm that you benefit in the hereafter, right? So you cultivate this world, and that is your role as a Khalifa fil ard. So the second brings us to the second point, which is our role as vicegerents in this world, right? We must have this vicegerental vision, when it comes to halal matters. So not just the food, right? But as vicegerent, right, we have to look at the entire universe. Khalifatu fil ard, not just ta'am, right? They are Khalifa on this earth, but not just the food, right? So we must have this vicegerental vision. And finally, right, we should see this task as something that is ibadah. It is something that is a ritual obligation. So when we eat good, something that is tayyib, it is something that is part of our ibadah, right? And the more closer we get, or the closer we get to fulfilling this task, right, the more moral one becomes. So, and finally, my final point very quickly is whatever alternative or solutions that we try to come up, we have to ensure that it is socio-economic viable, meaning it's not just for the rich, right? But we must ensure that those who are marginalized in society, the poor, the needy, they also have access to this tayyib food, right? Wallahu alam. I'm more than happy to share my notes later on. Yeah.
Yes, please. Thank you, Ustaz. Thank you so much. We can't take any more questions, but there will be episode 2 with Ustazah Syamil Sultana, inshallah. I'm going to have to end it right now before I lose this whole entire IG live, okay? So thank you so much, Ustaz. Assalamualaikum.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for the opportunity. Take care, everyone. Ramadan Kareem. Assalamualaikum.
Waalaikumsalam.